Support Narativ's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe and download. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Narativ Live. It's a Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. on the East Coast, 4 p.m. on the West Coast. And we've got a really interesting show today, all about coronavirus, all about the COVID-19 data. If you're hearing some leakage of audio, I guess it's coming from one of these devices I have here, so I apologize for that. Let me welcome our guests first. Charles Piller is an investigative journalist for Science Magazine, also known as Science these days. How are you doing, Charles?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on. LB's here, as always. Hi, LB. How you doing?
Hi.
You look fantastic. You look fantastic. I was just saying that before we got on the air.
I don't know why. I am getting a little bit more sleep, ironically.
That's helpful.
So that could be it. Yeah.
And Eric Garland, how are you tonight?
I am perfectly average, thank you.
So this story began actually when over the weekend. Was it the weekend? I can never remember the days anymore. When you posted a story out of AP, which said that some of the data had been flawed around COVID-19. Some of the data that we'd been reporting and people had been reporting was flawed, mostly the hospitalization data. And I sort of looked at that and I was curious about that. I started looking a little bit more deeply into it, and it reminded me about something that I posted a while ago about Peter Thiel being involved in the efforts of the White House to control coronavirus. So I was intrigued by all of that information and dug around, and I found Charles's very thoughtful and smart investigative piece that he published in Science Magazine, all about why this data is so flawed. And so, Charles, why don't you basically as you can, walk us through some of the key elements of what you discovered, because we're not talking about all the data. There's different types of data. There's death data, the death tolls that we see and that everyone sort of holds on to. Where it must be at around 229,000 right now. But what we're talking about is the hospitalization data, the amount of people that are in hospitals in the country.
Exactly right. So my investigation covered a couple of different things, but the gist of it is that I looked at the manipulation of the CDC by the Trump administration, and in particular, the role of Deborah Birx, President Trump's coordinator of his White House task force on coronavirus. And the element of her actions that I concentrated the most on, as you pointed out, is the hospital data. So why do we care about this? Why is this important? Well, as you mentioned, there's all different kinds of data that's being used to analyze the nature of the pandemic and how concerned we should be and where the hotspots are and all the related issues. So that's critically important and being gathered by a number of different sources, unfortunately not being gathered that well by the CDC, which is naturally the source that people would be prone to look for in a pandemic. But what the CDC had been doing is gathering detailed hospital data. And this is beds filled with COVID patients, ventilators used, and a wide range of other characteristics of how the pandemic is affecting hospitals. This is very, very important because it's the hospitals where the most extreme cases of the pandemic are leading to. And it's the exhaustion of hospitals, as we saw in New York earlier in the pandemic, and as we're now seeing in North Dakota and other places around the country that are running out of hospital resources. Having a big handle on that data is critically important to the federal response and to local responses to the pandemic.
So that's the tipping point, really, when people start packing up in the ICU wards and the ICU beds are full. That's when it gets really deadly. At least that's what we found out in New York.
Exactly right. It's the tipping point for how well the country is managing the most severe aspects of the pandemic. And so what happened was that the federal government made a decision to move the basic collection of data function away from CDC, an organization that had decades of experience.
Oops, I lost your audio there. Don't know why. Charles, can you still hear us? If you can, just will you wave? Otherwise, it looks like we might have.
Tracking.
Oh, there you are. You're back.
Oh,
we lost you for the last 2 seconds.
Sorry.
Can you repeat that last bit again?
Of course. The federal government moved the collection and analysis of this data from the CDC, an organization with decades of experience doing just that, and moved it over on Deborah Birx's control to a organization called Teletracking, a private company, to collect the data and then feed it in to Health and Human Services data system that was managed in large part by the company you mentioned, Palantir. So essentially a privatization of the hospital data collection function that historically had been done by CDC.
Which is stunning. And this is all, Dr. Birx, who we all recognize. That there's a picture of her. She's well known for her scarves. She held this meeting on July 16th or something like that, I think you said. She wasn't present there, but it was decreed at that meeting that her decision was to drop the CDC as the main collection agency and to go with a more this privatized teletracking company.
Exactly right. She made a unilateral decision against the advice of the subject matter experts in the federal government to go ahead and switch over to the privatization plan for this hospital data. So if it had worked out well, and if there were really brilliant people analyzing the data and collecting it and had been able to build the systems to do so, she would have been heroic in that role. Instead, what happened is a gigantic degradation in the quality and amount of data that was coming in the sense that a lot of data was missing. That's in part because she added a lot of very cumbersome work for individual hospitals, additional data fields that broke down their ability to respond in a timely fashion. And secondly, the private contractors operating this system didn't have the kinds of relationships with thousands of hospitals all over the country that CDC had built up over many years. So what you had was a reduced ability to collect the essential data and then use it to understand where the federal response should be directed in these most critical areas of hospitals, emergency rooms, ICUs, et cetera.
So there's 5,500 hospitals, apparently, that are tracked on a regular basis. And each of them was told in the middle of a pandemic, you have a brand new system. You have a brand new reporting system. And it's got all these categories, 5 pages, literally 5 pages. I just looked at them earlier on, of categories that you never had to fill in before. Some of them maybe, but not all of them. And suddenly you had all these people who had to take resources out of dealing with patients to track all this data and deliver it to the CDC's replacement, which is teletracking, and they in turn turned it over to the Department of Health and Human Services. That's a lot of additional work and a lot of change in the middle of a crisis. I mean, it sounds like a stunning amount of new weight and responsibilities, quite onerous.
Yes, I think you've summarized it well. The only change I would say is that it's actually 6,500 hospitals, closer to 6,500.
Oh,
wow.
And so one of the consequences of this is that immediately the people who run hospitals and understand the public health system immediately were outraged by this because they realized that it was almost certain to cause a lot of hiccups in the delivery of this critical information to the federal government system. And so you had more than 100 public health organizations, hospital associations, and others who immediately said, no, please do not do this. You had 21 attorneys general from 21 states and the District of Columbia who immediately said, please don't do this, revert back to the time-honored CDC system where they have the subject area experts who know how to analyze the information and to gather it effectively. So there weren't very many people around the country who were standing up and saying, yes, we need this change. It was mostly the experts, the organizations, the public health officials around the country were alarmed and concerned. And what's happened is they've seen their fears realized in the sense that there's a lot of missing data, there's a lot of inaccuracies in the data, there's a lot of nonsensical information that's being posted by the federal government now in organization and analysis of the data. And this raises questions about how well the government's going to respond. And I think we're seeing in places like North Dakota and elsewhere where you have a surge in cases and you have a surge in hospitalizations and a desperate need for better information and better response from the government. It's harder to do this when you don't really know what's going on the ground in a centralized way.
Charles Pillow, that's really interesting, investigative journalist for Science Magazine. Stay with us. We have so many more questions. Eric, I know you were asking about the stream link, if it's up, and it feels, I can see
We've got one.
So I apologize if people haven't.
My followers are on it, so
Great.
It's up and running.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you being so on it.
That's what I was doing. I'm sorry. I put it on. I went to the Periscope and retweeted the Periscope directly too.
That's awesome. Thanks.
But can I be the dumb person in the room? I need to be the dumb person. I have questions.
Ask questions. Ask questions. That's important.
I'm trying to follow. Yeah, I'm trying to follow. So I want to go back to Dr. Birx's authority. Mm-hmm. Was it really within her realm of authority to make this call to say it's not the CDC anymore? We're not going to be using that system, hospitals. You're going to be using this teletracker system. That's my first question. Could she have made that unilaterally, or would she have needed to get that instruction from somebody or that go ahead? So question number one.
Let's ask this. Okay. Go ahead.
What kind of money? what kind of money did teletracker get for this contract? This sounds like a government contract to me. I do a lot of research on government contracts, and I would like to know the size of this contract, the monetary size of this contract, how much money this company was making, because they were not a health company. They were a real estate. The guy he was not a health guy. He was a real estate guy. So what's a real estate guy doing getting this big contract? I hate to laugh at it because it's so horrifying. I'm trying not to cry. I'm done crying on Narativ. I'm trying not to cry on Narativ anymore. It's such horrible news we end up having to talk about here. I get emotional. But was it really her authority to make that change, right? And pick that company at one, and two, how much money did they get for it?
Okay, so the answer to the question is it's a good question about the extent of her authority. So one of the things I did, of course, is I went to Dr. Birx and to HHS, and I said, okay, whose authority exactly was this? And was Dr. Birx pressured by the Trump administration to give this contract, to turn it over to teletracking fully? She didn't give the contract, but to turn over the responsibility from CDC to the private company. And they didn't respond to that question. However, what we do know is from assessing the organizational responsibilities within the White House Task Force and how they oversee the federal agencies that are integral to COVID-19 response, you see that Dr. Birx is the co-chair of the key units of that organizational structure that would dictate the actions of those federal agencies. And she, of course, is the coordinator of the overall task force. So whether she literally could do this completely on her own, well, we don't know for sure. But we do know that she flipped the switch. It was her decision to go forward at the moment she did. Now, in response to your question about the money, it's a shockingly low amount of money that they're paying teletracking. It's only $10 million. And
10.2.
In my opinion, it's
but they
really
get all that data. Do they
small.
own all that data? Do they own all that data now? They get all the data. Do they have ownership of that?
I don't know what their rights are associated with the data, whether they don't own it. It's data that is collected by the government, but whether they have the rights to use it and for other purposes, I do not know. The other contract that you should know about is the Palantir contract, which is, so teletracking's gathering the data. Palantir is organizing and helping analyze the data. And their contract is $25 million. Both of these are exclusive contracts. So these are the two companies involved.
Were
bid.
other companies up for the bid? Was it no bid?
Well, that was sort of an interesting question. It was a no bid contract for teletracking. But then the HHS came back and said, no, it was a contract that was bid by several bidders, but they wouldn't release any information about the bidding process or who the other bidders were. So we are sort of left in the dark about that. Also, answering your question about teletracking.
Okay,
Sorry,
real quick on that one. Who was running HHS communication at that point in time when you made that request of them about the no bid?
Well, it was just the same folks that are in charge of it now. It was only, about
Are you
3
sure?
weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sure.
I guess you're asking about Michael Caputo. Was he involved in
I
any?
was.
No, Caputo was gone by then.
Okay.
He was gone. Okay.
And yes, yeah. For listeners who don't know about Caputo, he was the former head of communications for Health and Human Services, who flagrantly and often manipulated CDC and other federal agencies to essentially for political purposes for the Trump administration. And Caputo famously kind of flamed out a few weeks ago, where he went on a medical leave and acknowledged some mental health issues following his claim that the deep state was operating within the CDC to undermine the Trump administration. So it's a strange story about that high-level government official.
Yeah, that was really strange. He had weird dreams, or the shadows were moving in on him, or some strange.
Yeah.
Strange
and then
thinking.
he had fingernail cancer that leads to Russian window cancer.
Oh, there you go.
Well, listen, we're not going to do that, but it is important too. Our followers are pretty well informed, Charles, but just to also reiterate, Michael Caputo did work for the Kremlin. He did. He worked in public relations for Vladimir Putin himself. That's part of his resume. And Yeltsin.
So it should be noted that the contract, that's really interesting, and I'll show you some more about Caputo in a second. There's also, the contract was just recently renewed. So there was all this chaos about getting all the data in. And then the Senate wasn't really consulted, and the contract was just renewed for another $10.2 million. So it's a 10.2, I think, over just a short period of time. What does that be? A quarter, really. So they could be getting as much as $40 million a year if it's going to be renewed every quarter. Here's a look at that organizational chart that you had in your piece, which is really interesting, because you can see that Birx is responsible for this unified coordination group, which I guess, well, maybe you can walk us through this. Can you explain what this chart really shows?
Sure. This is an organizational chart that has never been made public before we published it. Was leaked to me by someone inside this apparatus. So you see that the way in which this organization is organized for the entire COVID response is in these 4 categories. The physician advisory group has no real responsibilities other than, as it says, advice. The unified coordination group and the Operation Warp Speed, which are 2 critical components of the federal response, are both co-chaired by Dr. Birx. And where it says White House, that, essentially she's there. She's in the White House also as the coordinator of the overall effort. So you're seeing that her areas of responsibility are quite broad and her powers are quite large. The Unified Coordination Group is over CDC and FDA in regard to the COVID response.
And it looks like Anthony Fauci is more of an advisor than a full-on member of that team.
He has no real power. Several people who were in positions of high authority within CDC told me that essentially the physician advisory group is nothing more than window dressing. And I might add that that's their words, not mine.
The other names that people obviously notice is Jared Kushner, who seems to be involved in every piece of this coronavirus mess, and Adam Bowler, who is a friend of Jared Kushner, who's also in charge of a U.S. development bank or corporation, as they call it. So those are interesting names to see here, especially because they tie in later on to Peter Thiel, and we'll get to that in a second. So I was struck by the this from your article. It said, "Why are they not listening to us?" A CDC official at the meeting recalls thinking. Several CDC staffers predicted the new data system would fail with ominous implications. Birx has been on a months-long rampage against our data, one texted to a colleague shortly afterwards.
Oh my God.
Good effort and luck getting the hospitals to clean up their data and update daily. So they knew this disaster was coming. People who were aware of how the system works knew this disaster was coming.
They didn't just know, they were warning against it over and over again. And I think the proof of this concern, I hope very much that we do not see this concern borne out in deaths and worse hospital experiences, but the proof of it will be coming up in the late fall and early winter when we see a possible combination flu and COVID pandemic. And right now, we're starting to see cases rising in cold weather areas of the country. And we're starting to see this kind of experience in North Dakota and elsewhere where because of a problem in the data pipeline, it's contributing to an inability to coordinate resources at the hospital level around the country. So if it worsens and if hospitals are less equipped to do their job effectively because of these data lapses, if you want to call them that, then I think these fears by CDC people, very, very important, responsible CDC people, will be borne out. And I sincerely hope that they're wrong, but all the signs are pointing to the validity of these concerns.
It will worsen. I mean, we're pretty much seeing that worsening happening daily. And we haven't even hit the biggest part of the season, and you can see the spike growing. So, I mean, it's almost certain that it's going to get worse before it gets better. So we are heading into a calamitous situation, it feels like, looking at your story and looking at the data, where we don't have any good way of tracking the things that saved. New York is the example we all look to, but we don't know how many ventilators are needed or being used, how many beds are available, how many masks are available, how much of the right masks are out, what other PPE is necessary. We just have no idea of whether the data that we're seeing is accurate, and what it means for patients ultimately is that you could be taken in a distressed state to a hospital and find out that ER is or that ICU is full to capacity.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. Yesterday, the HHS released for the first time a look at what individual hospitals are reporting, and so this was sort of an interesting characteristic way in which HHS is releasing information. They show which hospitals are reporting information and which ones are not reporting it, but they don't say what's being reported. So, for example, the issues that are of great concern to people in local areas who are thinking, if I end up in the hospital, is my hospital ready for me? Mm-hmm. Is my hospital ready to handle a surge in COVID cases if that should unfortunately occur in my local area? And unfortunately, you can't tell from the data that's being released by HHS. You can tell whether the hospitals are reporting if they have adequate PPEs. You can tell if the hospitals are reporting if they have adequate beds or they don't. But you can't see what the actual reporting data is. And so people on the ground don't know whether their local hospitals are doing well or poorly, whether they need more help or whether they're in great shape and able to handle any surge that comes along in the community.
So if you're in a high-risk group, it's something to really think about. The data you may be getting may be completely inaccurate. So, think about all the provisions you have to make to figure out what happens in the case of you becoming sick with COVID in these next few months as this horrible winter is coming upon us. Eric, you've had a little bit of time to research as well what's been going on in your neck of the woods, because this all sort of came to light out of where you are.
That's right. The first state that was reporting the failures of data, and they're like, we're having trouble with data entry, which, given the story that Mr. Pillar here is talking about, that it seems like there's a lot left out in that local explanation. There was just a data flaw and a flaw entering it. So, it looks like we were underreporting here in Missouri. And I live in St. Louis, but both Kansas City and St. Louis hospitals are experiencing, our local health officials are breaking into tears today as they give their press conferences, as Chicago's was. Mm-hmm. And this is the same state that had all those people partying at the Lake of the Ozarks like nothing was happening, because Governor Mike Parson said, hey, wear a mask if you want, have summer how you want. And in the middle of that summer, this change that Mr. Pillar's talking about took place, and the data, which just sounds nice and neutral, we weren't talking about how many people were actually being hospitalized. And if you look at the data that we have so far globally, there's of all the people that get it, 80% don't show any symptoms at all. Then the people that show light to medium symptoms. But if you are in the category that has to be hospitalized, you're in danger. And you have, depending on your age, you stand a fairly low chance of leaving. That is the data that was shifted out, changing horses midstream in July. And the first state where that was revealed was Missouri. And it's very interesting to see that Peter Thiel's Palantir is doing the data analytics there, since Thiel was the number one donor to Senator Josh Hawley's campaign to become Attorney General in 2016. And it's almost like you get this tight little group, especially when you look at that chart of quote responsibility that has Kushner's college roommate, Birx, Mark, Esper. It's almost like there's one starts to think conspiratorially about how something we already had infrastructure to do well, that we planned for years, all of a sudden gets swapped out to a company run by a real estate partner of Donald Trump and the Trump organization. So I'm interested in hearing more from Mr. Pillar.
It really is interesting. Here's the company Teletracking. Their main sort of enterprise is about creating these command centers in case of emergencies. It's a little bit like Carbon, the other real-time prevention or crime prevention company. So they have a similar kind of mandate, although they have been doing some hospital tracking, and this is what they've landed up doing. And the 70 to 124 was what NPR originally said was the number of elements that they increased from. So there was originally, hospitals had to gather 70 elements daily. Now they had to gather 124 elements. All of that, according to a government report, when you look at it, it was about 1.5 hours per hospital. So I can't read that number there because my eyesight's so bad, but it's in the 3 million hours of additional resources that were being deployed in order to get this done. And if you look at the actual performance of this new system that Teletracking put out, in July 14th, for example, this is Arizona, 3,205 patients, 24% inpatient beds. This is the CDC data. This is the data before the new data was introduced. Then Teletracking came along. It had fewer patients. Maybe that's possible. But look at the occupancy rate. Suddenly it's 42%. That makes no sense. Obviously, we're seeing something either counted completely differently, or there's just something wrong with the data collection. It just looks like that. And, if you happen to be needing a bed, and that 24 to 42% gap could mean, life or death for you. So, Charles, can you tell us a little bit more about the Teletracking and their background?
Sure. Well, Teletracking, this company does have experience with helping hospitals manage their data systems. So they're not completely coming from, for example, real estate, although indeed the primary owner of Teletracking is a real estate guy and a longtime Republican donor.
New York real estate guy.
And that did raise some concerns among some that there may be a relationship there with between this guy and the Trump administration. There's certainly the NPR had an excellent report on that. That's pretty interesting, raising some questions about that. But I wanted, if I may, to take a step back about to just reflect for a second on why we should care about this. Why is this important beyond the immediate problem with COVID data collection for hospitals? So what we've had is a situation where this is one very important, but for sure only one of many ways in which the Trump administration has used political goals to undermine the federal agencies, the professionals that are so critical on public health issues, FDA and CDC in particular. And So let me, if I may, just use a comparison. When President Trump removed the country from the Paris Climate Accords or withdrew from the World Health Organization, you could easily say perhaps Trump will lose the election. And when Biden gets in, he's almost certain to put the United States back into the World Health Organization and to renew our commitment to the Paris Climate Accords. But the question that remains in those situations is, who's going to trust the word of America after this sort of back and forth process? Will the credibility of the U.S. government be harmed for an extended period and maybe for a generation as a result of this kind of behavior internationally? I want to just draw a comparison to what's going on with CDC and FDA. When these agencies are undermined repeatedly for political reasons, when they are manipulated to make political goals higher than their scientific goals, when the agency heads, including Dr. Redfield of CDC, tend to absorb the White House commands and proceed along lines that are widely regarded as serving the White House political goals above public health, this dramatically reduces the faith the American people have in these agencies. And we've already seen it in polling data. So the question is, we're going to get through COVID eventually. There will be a recovery from this pandemic, but it's not going to be the last pandemic we face. We need those agencies to have public confidence. We need those agencies' words to carry weight with the American public so that people will take the effective vaccines when they come on the market, and that they will believe these agencies in the future when the next pandemic comes around. And what I fear, and what many public health experts fear, is that these sorts of intrusions of politics into the agency operations could affect the long-term confidence in their ability to do things.
Which is so tragic because the CDC has such a pristine, amazing reputation around the world. And now they have to combat all of this. Eric and LB, any other questions before we move on? Because there's a whole bunch of other areas, but I know there must be questions you have.
I'd like to talk about just one statistic that's in your article, Mr. Peller, about the difference between the data missing from the old CDC system that covered 37,000 hospitals and the new system that's been put in by this bootstrap organization with the usual suspects here. It looks like the NHSN, which was the CDC system, if I'm following correctly, showed
right.
3 to 6% missing data for such items as COVID-19 inpatient bed occupancy and ventilator use, and that's the most serious time for people who are sick with COVID. And teletracking showed 36 to 57% missing data on that.
Yeah, these were based on leaked documents from internal CDC reports that were widely shared within the federal government apparatus for COVID. So many people had access to this information within the government, but I was the first one who was able to obtain a copy outside. And yes, you're exactly right. Really, you're looking at during the time periods compared, and this goes up through the end of September, you're talking about an order of magnitude more missing data collected by the teletracking system than by the CDC's own system. So it's very concerning because missing data means unknowns. Unknowns mean we don't know where to steer federal resources to meet capacity and to assist local areas when they have the kind of surges we're talking about.
And there's a 30%, 40% gap in what we're talking about here. So that's a large amount of resources that need to be deployed quickly if it's that wrong.
Indeed, it's worrisome because getting ahead of the pandemic, getting ahead of the need is really what this is all about. What we're talking about is modeling where things are going so we can be there, so that the resources can be there, so that there can be a nimble medical response, and to prevent the overwhelming of local resources. Mm-hmm. And the only way you're going to know that is by having accurate, fairly complete data and being able to extrapolate that to understand what local needs are and to respond effectively.
Okay. So this leads to something I've never done live on Narrative before, but I have a source for you, Charles.
Okay. Send it to me via email.
So, I will. So back in, I want to say it was May. It was May or June. I know because I was recovering from being so ill, and I have a good friend who is with a major company and in charge of a big part of the private sector response with a company everybody would recognize, and called me distraught because FEMA had just come in and seized all their supplies. So I was very curious about that chart that you put up, Zev, that came from the article underneath Dr. Birx, and it didn't have Jared Kushner in there, but this is what was said, was, FEMA had called, seized everything, and said, we have the algorithms to know where things are going. Even though this company had the contracts with the hospitals themselves, because that's how typically it's also done with companies that provide either PPE or testing or whatnot. They have contracts with the hospital chains. Hospitals are also in big chains, everybody. They're big systems locally. Maybe I'm in the Los Angeles area, so there were several hospitals here. The VA is also a client of companies. And so what had happened was that FEMA had come in, and it was during that time period where we also heard from Jared Kushner that same sort of soundbite about these are our supplies, they're not for the states, they're for us. It was all happening in and around that same period. So I'm very curious as to Jared Kushner's deep involvement in all of those areas, except for that first one that they called their word, window dressing. But the three other little pillars you had there of the what would be the national response, right? The White House's response to the COVID outbreak. In that one where it was Dr. Birx determining, what supplies go where, Jared's name wasn't in there. I have a feeling he was. I don't know why they're hearing the word. These suppliers were hearing this term algorithms, right? Coming from FEMA. Right? FEMA saying, we have the algorithms. We know where it's going. Well, who's giving you those algorithms? Where are you getting these algorithms? FEMA, right? What company are you talking about? What do you mean you're running the data on this? Who wrote the algorithms? Can we see the algorithms? Right? This was a list of questions I was giving my friend back. I'm like, well, start asking him about these goddamn algorithms. I want to know where these algorithms are coming from that are determining who's getting PPE, who's getting a ventilator, who's getting tests, where the supplies are going. So,
the answer is Palantir, a lot of this. I mean, it seems to me that Palantir, as much as Teletracking collects it. So go ahead.
I just want to finish this.
Yeah.
This is a big story. I gave this source and this lead and this information to someone at the New York Times, again, New York Times, and they sat on it. And so if you're interested in it, I'm happy to hand all this to you. There was a lot of really shambolic stuff going on around that time where we were really in the first wave and in really deep trouble with it, and the data was being messed with.
Well, of course, please send it along.
And Charles, your sense of who is doing the analysis, is that the way it works, that Teletracking collects all this data, or is supposed to collect all this data, they're inputting it into a platform that appears to be developed by Palantir, and that Palantir is then analyzing that data?
Yeah, there's no question that Palantir is deeply involved in the data analysis. They developed the platform itself. HHS Protect is the name of it. And they are involved in organizing the data and a great deal of other federal data on COVID issues generally, not just the hospital data, but data all the way across the spectrum. Now, they're a very sophisticated company with regard to their data analysis, obviously quite controversial as well. The problem, I think, that many of the public health experts say with this is, just putting aside for a second the question about whether you trust Palantir fully, because of the controversy that they've been involved in with their work for example, the people at ICE, et cetera, in immigration matters. But the question of whether they have the correct subject matter experts, in other words, data is not just some kind of a neutral kind of item that you can understand without having deep knowledge of hospitals and systems and what needs are and what could go wrong and how do you communicate with people who are at the receiving end of their federal instructions. All of those things and many others go into making you an expert in how to analyze the data. It's not a matter of just throwing in so-called algorithms, but it's a matter of understanding how to develop an algorithm that understands the needs of the institutions that you're serving.
In fact, one of the criticisms of Palantir is that it can't handle large data sets. It's quite good at analyzing some data sets, but when they're too big and too cumbersome, they don't really know. So add to that another layer that it's health, that it's not something they're familiar with. It certainly is not the best time to try out something new, even for a company like Palantir. And Palantir, as you say, is a very controversial company. It's, of course, owned by, well, the CEO is Alan Karp, this guy, but famously, Peter Thiel is the main funder of it, and one of the key founders, and this guy, Stephen Cohen, are the three founders. Now, they have a very unusual relationship as well. They're currently listing on the stock market. They're having their first IPO, and there is a way that they've listed it in a way that they can never be really removed from power or authority within this company. And if you know what Palantir does, is it basically collects data from various databases and cross-references them and puts them out in a nice, easy way for people to understand. So on top of the data that they've now collected from, maybe intelligence organizations, because they are linked to In-Q-Tel, which is a company, a venture capital firm that is funded by the CIA. It's an arm of the CIA. They do a lot of work with the CIA. So let's assume they have a lot of CIA data available to them. They have FBI data, they have ICE data. And now on top of it, they're going to have all this health and human services data, all this coronavirus data. That's a lot of data to land in one place. And it's not just, it's not just privacy concerns, because there are definitely privacy concerns, but we never expected our health data to be intermingled with all this other stuff that these guys are collecting. And yet here it is. Charles, I hope you would comment on that, but maybe you don't want to.
I got one.
I'm not really an expert on Palantir's whole realm, and I don't really care to get into that.
All right, Eric, go ahead.
I got one. This is a group of people who don't give a shit about the law, so what do they care? They have another mission here, and it ain't in the public interest. They're loud and proud it's in the private interest, and what they've done here with a pandemic that's going to create, that's already created a pile of bodies that's about to get a lot deeper. It seems like this may go from civil lawsuits into criminal conspiracy quite quick from where I'm sitting. So
they're about to be listed at $20 billion. This is a company that in 2012 was worth $2 billion at best. It's a lot of growth for a company, and they're one of the biggest, unicorns on the block. They certainly 20 times unicorn now. So they definitely have traction, and they have a lot of clients, and most of those clients are in government. And so you say that they're, have their interests that are different from the public, yet their main clients are the government.
Well, that's definitely who they want to sell to, and anytime Palantir's been
that's
trying
the big
to get
money. That's the money.
Yeah.
It's huge money, and all the data one could want. What to do with it, I don't know what. But you're not going to get a reach into data privately like you're going to get if you're working with governments. I think it's a plural there.
Yeah.
I also think it's it's hard, because Zev and I talked before the show of it's always trying to talk about things like this and walk this fine line of, if we have intelligence agency involvement, especially our own, and there's honestly, guys, there's no question about this. No one's trying to hide anything here, because it's very possible nothing's going on that's wrong, right? So you know, you have to really be careful in talking about these things because we don't really know where it's going. We only can sort of raise flags up about where we see big problems ahead, big, big concerns, big issues, and what do we do about it? I personally, with a company like Palantir, with a platform that can do what it's doing, and with the kind of contracts that it's garnering, and the kind of money and the players behind it, I do want our own good guys sort of in there looking at, okay, what are you guys doing now? I mean, I don't have a problem with that to a certain degree, and I don't want to. I think we have to be careful vilifying any of these entities around intention when we're just not clear. Peter Thiel to me is someone I can't put in the bucket of a sort of a villainous character, but is everything this guy touches end up being a problem? I don't know. I
mean, one of the challenges with him is that he's not only a supporter of Donald Trump, as you see there, but he carries around a picture of his really good friend Eric Prince in his wallet, which he revealed to a journalist a couple of years ago from the New York Times. I mean, yeah.
What is that about? That's weird.
It's weird. There's no doubt about it. It is weird that these two have so much in common with each other and seem to be, somehow working together. I mean, Eric Prince obviously is involved in the mercenary field, is involved in the defense sector, and so does Palantir. So the simplest explanation is that. But why would he be having a picture of him in his wallet? I don't know. Or his wallet? I think it was on his cell phone. Sorry, I should say in his cell phone. But it was an unusual thing that he pointed out on purpose to a journalist. So it does strike you as sort of a interesting thing. And his relationship with Donald Trump is interesting. He's also spoken at white nationalist events, or at least attended them.
That's right.
Those things all raise lots of questions. They raise lots of questions about
Mark Zuckerberg's big buddy. Yeah,
that's the other thing. He funded Facebook.
I almost forgot.
Yeah. So, you're talking about a person that's at least potentially compromised. So,
with Chuck Johnson, doing deals still with Chuck Johnson.
And
it's a problem.
It's an issue. And then here he is. He's going to have all this data and control of this company that can never be taken away.
But to bring this to the practical, all right, we had a government system. And it's pointed out in your article, Mr. Pillar, that it's got this the CDC system was criticized. It was underfunded for years, but yet it losing of 3 to 6% of data. Clearly, it's not Six Sigma. You want a 0.00 whatever, but that's not necessarily realistic. Where you actually might have a data entry problem, where the charge nurse didn't load in that second bed that left or forgot to file or whatever. When you're talking about 37,000 hospitals, it gets into human error. But in the middle of the most deadly mortal event in a century in this country, just as people were starting to pay less attention to it because the numbers of infections were dipping down as we entered the summer, we get a Kremlin employee doing all the communications over at HHS, and we switch to this private vendor. And at the end of the day, we get what is, in scientific statistical terms, a tectonic increase in failure. And moreover, now we're going into the winter season. We are going to dark days. I mean, right now in Belgium, they're overwhelmed. In the city of Liège, and one third of people are testing positive for COVID. 25% of hospital workers are COVID positive, and they're having them work even though there's a risk of spreading the disease further, because if they're as long as they're asymptomatic, if they don't, the hospital system will collapse and even more people will die. We have all this sophistication and all this data. You're right. We can't speculate about exactly what the dude who hangs out with white nationalists and the platform that was just used by Russian intelligence. Well, who knows? He could be a great guy. But at the end of the day, we went from a system that we had that would have informed governors, mayors, hospital CEOs of what do you need to do and this is really critical tactical stuff, because if there is if you have ventilators that you don't need, remember Mike Pompeo sent a bunch of our stockpile over to China just as the thing started to hit us. So with the ones we have left, since the ventilators that we were going to have produced, they kept kicking the contract forward and all that. So, we've had a little trouble with the Defense Production Act here. We need to, if St. Louis is not sick, New York is sick, we need to know who's sick so we can send them the stuff. So no one will die here, and then we'll control suffering there. But when you're talking about going from 3 to 4% data missing to half your goddamn data missing, you're talking about a stack of dead bodies. So this seems to be quite a scandal.
Yeah, it's a very, very scary and difficult situation, and I think it's, look, I can't see inside people's minds. I don't know what their intentions were. I take it on faith that someone like Dr. Birx, who many people in public health and many people in CDC view as misguided in her approach, and even worse than misguided. But on the other hand, I'm quite sure that she is not in favor of the pandemic overwhelming the country. She wants to do something useful. Some of these actions are misguided. Some are outright foolish, according to many of the public health experts that I've spoken to. But I think what the issue is a cascade of decisions, some of these decisions were directly motivated by the political needs of the Trump administration. And some were just perhaps tactical decisions that didn't work out well. And this combination of things leads to a profound distrust, not just of the administration's response to COVID, but of the bedrock governmental institutions that have to be in good stead with the American public to protect us and to protect our communities, namely the CDC and the FDA. Mm-hmm. If their credibility is undermined by people with maybe misguided ideas and good intentions, or maybe people who are being manipulated for political reasons, or some combination of those things, it's still very bad for us. And it's important to support those institutions' ability to be authoritative and to do the right thing.
Right. That's right. And I do feel like, look, we're all hoping that we can get some stability after this election, right? But I am hopeful that with putting sort of the right people in charge and getting things back on track, that the institutions also can right themselves fairly quickly, especially around something like a pandemic where you're dealing with the CDC and the HHS, and I think in terms of if the response can actually be fixed to be what we know we're capable of and what we have been capable of in the past, then the faith in the institutions comes back, because the ship is righting itself, right? And so that's it, one follows the other. I do believe that we have that ahead of us if we can get the right people in there to know what they're doing. And so I'm not so worried about that. But I did want to ask you, Charles, what do you see, having looked at this so carefully? What would make a difference for those people? Hopefully we can get a turnover. Hopefully we can get people coming back in that know what they're doing and that have a clarity over what actually needs to be done. What could be done with the data itself? Like maybe the top 3 things that you could see of, like, if we just did X, Y, and Z with this data, we'd be on a much better path. It would be working for us. Do you have anything like that to share that's helpful?
Sure. So the practical use of these data is in part to allocate resources, to allocate federal resources where they're most needed. And the second thing, I think I mentioned this earlier, is that what you always want to do is anticipate problems, anticipate the severity of problems so that you can have resources in place to handle them when they occur. And I think if the data are being used in their best, highest way, it would be valuable to be able to put the modelers who have this decades of experience back in place, analyzing the data and projecting out where the needs are going to arise with the greatest severity, and to be able to put federal resources and local resources to use where they're needed. That will save lives. That will prevent hospitals from being overwhelmed in the long run. And so to me, that's the practical issue. As for your comments about the future, first of all, I applaud your optimism about the recovery of these agencies. I really sincerely hope that you're right about that. I think what people inside CDC are telling me is that the agency will be hollowed out if Trump remains in power for another 4 years.
Right.
They're looking for
Right.
the exits. And so that's a question. Look, I'm not taking a position on that, the validity of that comment, except that people I trust within CDC are very concerned about it. They see their colleagues looking around for other jobs, worried about the future of their agency. These are people who love the CDC, who have spent their careers there, but don't feel that they can do their best work there anymore and need to feel like they're making a contribution. So I would just say that your optimism, which again I applaud, is I think it has a good chance of coming into fact, depending on the outcome of the election, according to the CDC people with whom I talk. Yeah.
I think it's very
It really is all on the line. It really is. It really is one of those elections that every single institutional expert continues to say to us about, whether it's intelligence agencies folks, CDC folks, right, EPA, right? They're all saying, if he gets in again, you're looking at the destruction of this institution. And that has everything to do with the functioning of our democracy. It really does. You can't separate that. You can't separate a really healthy CDC, HHS, right, with a healthy democracy. You can't. It doesn't. They go hand in hand.
Especially when you think
we are our institutions. We are our institutions. We are.
When you think about them using the army, and that's Trump's plan, is to use the army to distribute vaccines. Now, how are they going to do that?
Guy that set up he's got that guy that he likes, right? I can't remember his name right now. He's just good at operations.
Well, I think it's Esper that's involved in that, but it's still, you can't just force people to take vaccines. You can't just show up in their neighborhoods and say, you've got to be vaccinated. This is not how America works. It doesn't, they say they have a plan. They've not been very transparent about it. As you point out, the people at the CDC and those other fine institutions are going to start looking elsewhere for work. And we haven't even hit the worst part of the pandemic yet. I think that's still ahead of us. And so, the way people vote in the next week is critical. But also, the earlier point you made, I thought was really interesting. There is something that people can do. They can, call their senators and call their congresspeople and ask that the old CDC be reinstituted. Now, it's, it may not work. It likely won't work. But at least it's worth having your voices out there and making sure that this story gets heard by more and more people, because I fear it is getting drowned out by what seems to be, other big news or other distractions in the news.
News cycle being what it is, it's very, very hard to keep people's attention on anything for more than a short while. But this is not an issue that's going away, because the consequences of it are high, and it will come back to us if it's not fixed.
I mean, the consequences are basically assured. That is why the health officials in places like St. Louis, where people have been overly lax, as if God owes them a favor, and the particles of RNA are not going to act like they normally do here. They're starting to break down in tears because the mathematics and the biology do not care. And a lot of this is assured. And, people remember a little bit of, refrigerator trucks of dead people in New York City, right? This, if you've been following Dr. Dina Grayson's work, this was going to have a certain bump in the first winter. It was going to have a lull, as coronaviruses do, until about now, when people start congregating inside and they start heading in for the drier air of heating systems inside. And there's an explosion, especially if people have gotten used to congregating, not wearing masks, all that. And that is what our leadership has done at the same time that they have hobbled intentionally one of the most respected institutions. And, I'm a DC denizen, and CDC and NIH are globally respected institutions, the best in the world. And in NIH particularly, I had friends that worked there and I've worked with them. And, you have people come from, if you have a disease that 2 people get out of 7 billion, it goes to NIH, and the amazing cutting edge research and thinking about protecting the health of the world. Yeah, there's the World Health Organization, but there's so many of those the sharpest minds in the world working together, promoting science, and they have been beset by these mobsters and grifters and criminals pushing these political appointees down on them. And you cross-reference that with the new executive order they're trying to push that would allow them to clean out tens of thousands of people if they don't like Trump. That's what's coming up next. And all the love and respect to your contacts over there, Mr. Peller, and give them our support, because they are essential to this nation, and they never get thanks because they work quietly and incredibly diligently, and we owe them our protection and our appreciation.
Well, I'm sure they appreciate that. Thank you.
I have one more question for you, Dr. Peller, and then you probably want to head off. But the one question I have is around Dr. Birx. Do you think Americans should have confidence in her ability to manage this, or what's the perception around her, at least from within the CDC, that you're hearing?
I think the perception within the CDC that is extremely common and widely shared, including among top leadership within the CDC, is that Dr. Birx, for reasons that people aren't really completely sure about, is one of the key forces for undermining and perhaps even destroying the agency's ability to function effectively as the key force in combating COVID-19. So what her motivations are, what her goals are, hard for me to discern, but I'm saying that within the agency, she's considered to be someone who is actively destroying their opportunities to work on our behalf.
Well, that's alarming.
Wow. Frau Birx.
She's got a history of this, right? She's got a history of this. This is not her first, first foray into controversy. She was involved in the AIDS fights and PEPFAR. Oh, did you freeze up? No, you're still there.
I froze up at a really funny face. Yeah. Sorry, everybody.
But
that blew me away. That statement blew me away.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about PEPFAR and her experience there at PEPFAR? Because I think that's really interesting.
Sure. So PEPFAR is a very important and overall quite successful foreign aid program of the United States to combat AIDS in the developing world. And Dr. Birx has been head of PEPFAR since 2014. She's still head of PEPFAR, but right now she's sort of, you might say, on leave to run the COVID response. And what I found in my reporting for this article is that many of the concerns raised by people at the CDC about how she operates and how she controls the realms that she's responsible for reflected similar kinds of approaches at PEPFAR. The words used were dictatorial, authoritarian, and the problem is that, so look, tough managers are tough managers. They often get things done. I'm not suggesting that tough management is a bad thing necessarily. I think the issues that were raised at PEPFAR are similar to the issues that have been raised at CDC, which is to say that Birx used financial imperatives for programs to report certain kinds of data that she required, data that was often considered unreasonable and extreme and perhaps even beyond what was useful and effective in guiding policy judgments, but an obsession with this sort of detailed data. And the threat of losing your money for not providing certain kinds of data is an invitation, and I'm not making up these words. These were stated by PEPFAR employees on the ground in the developing world. It's an invitation to cooking the books. In other words, if you're going to lose your money if you don't supply data,
I got some
you're going to
rumbling.
supply data, whether it's true or not. And this is now being applied. This method is now being applied within the collection of hospital data throughout the country. So they've already been warned. A couple of weeks ago, they were warned by the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare and by Dr. Birx, who was instrumental in creating this policy, that either they submit the data or their money, their Medicare and Medicaid money, is going to be removed. So hospitals depend on that money. They can't function without it for the most part. And so it raises the question, not, look, these hospitals are made up of dedicated.
Oops, you froze up there for a second. 1 second, you should show up. It just froze up.
Dedicated. Hospitals are made up of dedicated.
No, it looks like he's coming back.
Creates the
we missed you. We lost you there for a few seconds.
You said
sorry.
hospitals are made up of dedicated, and then we lost you. We lost you on dedicated.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say that that these individuals are not people who are prone to phoning up their data. But when you're facing an existential threat, namely, you don't have money to run your hospital unless you submit data, you're going to submit data. And people at the CDC who have decades of experience with these sorts of issues and have seen these kinds of problems in other realms are warning that these financial imperatives will create circumstances where some hospitals under threat might create false data to make sure that they get their Medicare money. That's just an additional problem in the way that the data collection is being structured now.
Wow, so scary, really is scary, and unfortunate they're using those tactics. So yes, I know. I feel like we've had a very it's a heavy time. It's a heavy time. So
Sorry, folks.
Charles, thank you so much for joining. Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay.
I'll be and Greg, we'll come back after this break and we'll have a little more of opportunity to chat. But Charles, I want to thank you very much for joining us and sharing your incredible reporting. I think it's really, really important reporting. And if people haven't seen it, haven't read the story, I'll post it under this on my feed. So please check it out and keep us informed as you learn other things. Charles, we'd love to have you back on if you get new information about this. Thank you very much, and we'll be right back.
Thank you.
Welcome back, and boy, that was a dark conversation, wasn't it, guys? But so chilling what we're learning about this data and how badly.
I got my tequila. I have to move from water to tequila.
It's shocking.
I'm sorry.
It's shocking what this administration is doing. I mean, we've sort of, you've had Jared Kushner being responsible for now. This is the umpteenth scandal within a scandal that he's now responsible for, and yet we continue because it just looks like he's not accountable to anybody. Jared Kushner does not answer to anybody, well, as far as we can tell.
We don't. No, everybody's afraid of him. He gets to do whatever he wants. He's horrible. Mm-hmm. Hey, I have to say something, and someone caught this in the comments, and also I caught it when he was talking about, how Birx is threatening these hospitals and these, and the administrators at hospitals can be doctors as well, or you have the head of, the chief, whatever, MD is the one that's actually ordering supplies and ordering things. But based on, now that we know that that's coming in, that they're not getting their money unless they report numbers, unless they give the data that Birx wants, This now is the decipher for Donald running around on the campaign trail starting a couple days ago and saying doctors are profiting off of the COVID, right? It's always, when he says that, it's always his spin on their own corruption that they're doing, right?
That's what I posted. When I posted that, it was exactly right.
Right. And that's so that when this truth comes out, when this reporting comes out of, holy shit, they were threatening hospitals, saying, we're not going to give you Medicare money, Medicaid money. We're not going to give this to you until you give us what we want. And Birx was a heavy on all of that, that Donald gets to take that and spin that into, hey, they're profiting off of high COVID numbers. That's what this is all about. They're out to get me because they make money off of this. That's his preemptive offensive bullshit strike on when the reporting actually hits that, holy fucking shit, they were leveraging these hospitals in the middle of a pandemic. They were blackmailing them. That's a heavy. In the mob, we call that the heavy. That's someone that comes in that says, give us what we want, or we're going to fucking beat the shit out of you, right? Or we're going to withhold what you want from us, or we're going to rain hell down on your business, on your family, on whatever it is. So
that's what it looks like to me. That's what it looks like.
That's what it is. That's what he's talking about.
And he's lying, obviously, but he's going to get away with it because there's enough confusion about this that he'll throw that into the mix because he preempts it.
He's reframing it. He's framing it in a certain way so that when the truth comes out, right, which is coming out now.
You did it for the money. They did it for the money. Now, let me give you the statute behind that because I've already looked this up. Because as soon as Mr. Pillar said that, I went, "Oh, you mean submit fraudulent data for Medicaid and Medicare?" Well, now we're in criminal territory. So what Birx is doing is saying, hey, you want to save people's lives? Then you're going to implicate yourself in these crimes by committing federal felonies, such as 31 U.S. Code.
Another mob tactic.
Another mob tactic. Subsection 3729, false claims. In general, subject to paragraph 2, any person who A, knowingly presents or causes to be presented a false or fraudulent claim for payment or approval. B, knowingly makes or uses or causes to be made a false record or statement material to a false or fraudulent claim, etc. It goes on. You get the gist. And yeah, that's a mob thing. Look, Pally, hey, you do this thing for me. If you want, you want that money for your people. Hey, guess what? I can drop a dime on you too. This is just fucking mob shit.
But it's our healthcare workers. It's our healthcare workers. I mean, you've got people there that are, saving lives, not sleeping, desperately in tears every day. You see them on TV every day, and these people are having to firstly make choices as administrators. You got to decide, am I going to save a life or I'm going to fill in the form for Dr. Birx today because she needs 124 data points and it's going to take an extra hour and a half. Am I going to use that time to have someone sit there do that, or is someone going to save a life? So there's that choice being made. And then on top of that, they're being threatened. They're being threatened with their funding if they don't do it. I mean, what is going on? There's just no incentive to do anything at that point.
Look, these are thugs. Why did I come out of the woodwork and start screaming on social media, right? And create this whole thing over all these years and every single day do it? Because I know what organized crime is all about. I know what it is. And when you have a crime family, 2 of them now, right? Trump's and Kushner's, in the White House, this is the fish rots from the head. Everybody becomes a fucking thug. Everything's extortion. Everything's blackmail. Everything's a heavy. Everything is a entrapment op, right? A blackmail op, right? Everything is going to work this way. They're going to run shit this way. And even people who, they're going to attract people in there that somehow that fits with their own sensibilities in some way to where they can justify it, like a Dr. Birx. And next thing you know, she's pushing people into the realm of criminality just so that they can fucking save lives, right? And doesn't even think of it that way.
Because she needs the data. Or someone told her that she needs the data. I mean, it's, I remember that time when she was giving that press conference and Trump asked her about the injecting bleach. Was that the one where he asked her? He asked her if that would be effective or one of those, and she didn't say no. And that was the moment I was like, God, there's
She
something
didn't get
wrong.
up and take the mic.
There's something wrong there. This is a doctor who's not giving advice that people need to hear. And then she's letting this man get away with telling people to do something that could kill themselves.
And that's
Do
different
no harm,
than
Dr. Birx.
Exactly.
no.
Do no
But,
harm, lady.
Let's talk about whistleblowers there, because it's one thing. I just saw it's the 1 year anniversary of Colonel Alexander Vindman coming out and testifying to tell us about this thing happening in Ukraine and the National Security Council, and mobsters going out and replacing the State Department. And his wife Rachel Vindman is on Twitter and saying, "Hey, it's the 1 year anniversary." She is fantastic. It's the 1 year anniversary of our family absorbing this hit from having come out, and from Colonel Vindman giving this testimony, right? But you got to be really. There are so many people who have seen stuff that just disgusts them, scares them, and when they have a security clearance, and that's why there has to be very defined whistleblower statutes and procedures, because guess what?
Right.
That Ed Snowden shit that they're like, oh, this is how he's a whistleblower. No, he's not. He's a traitor. That's different.
That's right.
You got to be able to go through and then they started stopping the pipes where whistleblowers could say, hey, I've seen something horrible in the intelligence community. That's got to stay in this little pipe between ODNI and Adam Schiff, or whoever is the chair of House Intelligence. This is different, lady. This is, you took the Hippocratic Oath. You're sitting there, and some Goomba from Queens says, hey, maybe we'll just, inject bleach into ourselves. You get up, if you have a medical license, honey, you get up and you leave the fucking room. Right then and there, you get a Twitter account and you go, fuck this, because maybe you have a clearance for some stuff, but nobody needs a clearance to spill the secret that maybe injecting bleach ain't going to help you. This is not do you agree? Is this a complicated security matter? Don't inject bleach.
It's so easy to do that, and it so bugs me that she remains there. Even she's not that experienced in respiratory diseases either. It's not her specialty. So she's just she's got experience, and she's a military person. Just that comes with her own sort of like things. But military people are fantastic, of course, and there's no reason why that would be an issue. But the history she has with PEPFAR was really the other thing that struck me, is that she does not, if she's been described by people in that field as authoritarian and dictatorial and overly demanding, well, then it's scientists and doctors, people who are very careful about what they're saying. They're not just saying words. They're saying that for a reason. And I spoke to a couple of the whistleblowers that are out there. They're scared. I wouldn't say scared. There is a concern around speaking out more, because we've had a few. We've had Dr. Bright. We've had the woman in Florida who spoke up against DeSantis. There's the Mike Pence person who was on that committee. A lot of those people, they came out. They said their bit, like Colonel Vindman. And then what happens? Then they get left out in the cold. They can't find jobs that easily because the job market is tough anyhow. But also they've got this thing hanging around, where they maybe can upset the administration or something if they get hired by somebody. So, you've got it's not easy to be a whistleblower. It really isn't. And even after they've done it, to come on and re-air those grievances, that's not something they relish. It's not something that they're looking to do. So if anyone thinks that they're looking for the 5 minutes of glory, they're definitely not.
No.
I always like to leave something for the end, and this won't surprise anybody here, I don't think. But so here's two pictures, I think taken on the same day. It's Jared Kushner meets Bibi Netanyahu, and Peter Thiel meeting Bibi Netanyahu.
What? No way!
Yeah, because they both like Bibi Netanyahu, and you'll recall as well that Thiel has some involvement in that carbon company. He was a funder of that. Remember, Jeffrey Epstein was there too.
Yeah.
We remember.
And the whole of the Israeli Defense Forces Intelligence Secretariat, as well as this Victor Vekselberg. You might remember him.
We do.
Yeah. So there's all that. Those are all interesting. And here's the kicker: is that Trump actually met Thiel through Kushner. Kushner and Thiel were friends first. and it's Kushner who introduced Trump to Thiel. So it's something you probably haven't heard before. Interesting information to share at the end of this, but it does make you think about Thiel's loyalties or objectives a little bit more.
You're always so you're so subtle and nice. There has to be a counterbalance to the two of us. Can I say something?
Yeah.
I want a new title. Let's just get this out. Kushner, as stupid and disaster prone as he is Mossad's idiot station chief in the United States. He apparently he's their station chief. He's the worst. He's
the idiot. Idiot station chief.
But he's an idiot station chief. There's no doubt. Probably at the embassy, or wherever that I used to live next to, right? And you'd go by that. You'd drive by on a cell phone call. Every time you drove by, your phone call dropped. Whatever. So there's probably the real Mossad one, and there's idiot remedial intel station chief, and that's
that's Jared.
You can do it, Jared. You can do the intel ops.
I don't know. I said that. He's doing a terrible intel op right now. So you look at the slide again, just because it's so interesting. There's his friend Alex. Is he his college friend, Alex Bowler? I think that was his college friend who was doing the testing. Adam Bowler.
Yeah, that's his roommate.
Yeah,
and he was in charge of the Kodak thing, where Kodak. Yes. Oh, we're going to fire up the chemical plants. Oh wait, okay. Yeah.
And before that, he was doing testing. He was doing the testing, and that didn't work either. So he's done so well at that now they've kept him on for domestic manufacturing, along with Trump's trade person. And then there's Esper Azar, who's just basically pointless. And that's it. That's who's running your defense, people. The FEMA guy. That's who's running your defense against this incredibly complicated and killer virus. I mean, just...
It's like it's a conspiracy with the same names of main conspirators who have no choice anymore, and now their final act, as we're within days of showing this incredible outpouring of democratic fervor from the American people, which is we've had a hell of a lot of bad news and bad analysis of bad things here tonight, but luckily in the backdrop, compared to the past months and years working together, we get a great backdrop, which is that the people are voting in droves. Young people are voting. Yeah. We've been describing the horror, and you don't have to understand all the complexities that Team Puke and Team Cry understand. You just need to know, I don't like this, and vote for Joe and Kamala, and we can start the process of unfucking all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I have something important, actually.
Course.
I forgot that I promised I would say this. So please go to my timeline, and I'll retweet it again as well. But there are certain states where, if you've been following along of like this sort of fuckery around mail-in ballots and the time to get your mail-in time, and then they're coming back, oh, I didn't request it in time, so I'm not going to get it in time. And now we have Supreme Court rulings coming down for certain states of, thanks to Brett Kavanaugh and some others of, nope, we're not going to count. This state doesn't have to count ballots past election, which is basically screwing all of our troops and everyone overseas that mails in their ballots in some of these states. So don't think that the military isn't feeling the hit of this, right? That all of a sudden their vote's not going to count in the process that they have no choice over, right? If they're stationed overseas of mailing something in. But I want everyone to pay very close attention to your own state and your state's rules. And right now we need a spotlight on Pennsylvania and on mail-ins, because it looks like as of 5:00 Eastern time tonight, your mail-in sort of was your mail-in deadline in terms of getting it into the mail. So know whether or not you need to, even if you have a mail-in ballot, you might have to go and hand deliver that and give it in person and find an in-person place to do that. For Pennsylvania specifically tonight, not that I'm from Pennsylvania, but folks there talking to me, I'm going to retweet something on my timeline. Go to my timeline. If you're in Pennsylvania, if you have your mom is in Pennsylvania, your dad, your friends, and they think they can still mail their ballot in, you might want to hurry up and get them some information right away of what they need to do with their ballot so that it will be counted. And then there's even districts within Pennsylvania that are specific of the kinds of counting. You know, if the more we can do paper, the better, everybody. So I'll put that up on my timeline again. Please look
And
for
that's
that.
at Lincoln's Bible, without the apostrophe and without the space there, but at Lincoln's Bible on Twitter, of course.
That's right. That's right.
And so that's important information. We are 1 week away. This time next week, we will be hopefully gathered here and declaring a new president of the United States. If not, I'm going to cry, but it'll be okay.
I'm coming to you. I'm out of here.
It looks like it's going to be okay, and you keep up the effort, keep up the voting effort, and keep up the pressure on your senators, on your administrators in hospitals. The CDC should be back in charge of the testing, and sorry, not the testing, the data collection. They should be in charge of this. There's no reason for this new company without this experience and Palantir and all their weirdness. We do not need them right now in this pandemic. This pandemic can be well handled by the CDC if they just let them do their job. And we need to get pressure on the government and on Congress people to really work hard to get this more attention, because it's disastrous if this continues along this road. Clearly, these guys are not capable of doing their job. And that's all we've got for you tonight. Eric, do you want to say anything else before we go? What do you say?
Strap in.
All right. Thanks very much for joining us.
Stay frosty
on Narativ Live. Stay frosty. You can catch Eric Garland's podcast, Game Theory Today, which had a great episode today come out. So check that out. And we'll be back Friday with the after show. A little bit spooky, a little bit scary. Hope you'll join us then. Have a good night, everybody. Support Narativ's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative, and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe and download. You want to advertise on Narativ Live? Well, we have partnered with AdvertiseCast to handle our advertising and sponsorship requests. They're great to work with, and they'll help you advertise on our show. Please email sales@advertisecast.com or visit our show notes page. You'll find that in your podcast player where we describe what's on this week's show.